So thank you and welcome to Activating Data as a Strategic Asset. So most organizations that I talk to are overrun with data, but they're really struggling with how to actually drive value and timely insight out of that data. I see great intent from organizations in terms of what they want to deliver off a data strategy, but they really struggle in the execution. So today, I am going to be joined by Sarah Bassett, who heads up AWS for South Australia and Western Australia, as well as two of our fabulous customers, Glenda Crisp, who is Chief Data Officer for the National Australia Bank, and Bobby Shake, who heads up BI Data and Analytics for Vodafone. And they're going to share with us some of their insight in terms of how do you actually start to activate data as a strategic asset to the business. But before we get to the how, I'd like to talk a little bit about why. So why is data a strategic asset? Every organization has customer transactions, they have supplier transactions, they have digital assets, they have connected devices. We talked about a whole lot of other sources of data this morning that actually give us insight into our business. Yet we really struggle to pull that together into really clear analysis of the health of our business and where our business is going. When I think about traditional analytics, we used to have a very clear, point-in-view time around transactions. But smart organizations want to know more than what they just sold or the transaction that happened. They want to know about all the events that occurred prior to that transaction. So how did a customer interact with a marketing campaign? When did they visit our website? When did they visit a shop? What social media did they interact with? What does that full picture of a customer journey look like all the way up to the acquisition of something? But also, what does it look like afterwards? And I think Adrian said it really well in the earlier session. The future of scaling up IT is about being able to scale all of those products that you sell out into the marketplace. And I'd like to put a data and analytics perspective across the top of that. Every interaction, everything that tells you something about your business is an opportunity to drive value out of the business. So when I think back to this morning's session, there are a couple of key things that really come out for me. There were some really outstanding comments by Rob James about Qantas in terms of the data that they're generating and just the mere idea of having engines that are generating a petabyte of data. There's potential value in that in terms of delivering value. I love the concept around constellation. That ability to just continually optimize those flight plans so that they drive down cost is an extraordinary capability. When I think about the ag tech stuff that we saw this morning, that idea of robots in fields who literally can, through computer vision, plant by plant, understand, the specific needs of a plant in terms of fertilizers and food and absolutely optimize and drive value out of agriculture is really, really extraordinary. But the question really comes, how do we get started? How do we actually execute on that sort of strategy? So, I've talked a little bit about why data is strategic. To me, data is the heartbeat of your organization. It tells you about the health of your organization. And if you have that, if you have well-digitized, processes in your organization, you can tell at every point what's going on. You can predict the future. You can, as the keynote, one of the ladies in the keynote talked about this morning, if you are understanding who's maybe searching on your website for something, you can predict what demand for that product's going to be. But on the downside, if you have dark spots in that value chain inside your organizations, if you don't have a view of how customers are looking at products or using your products, then that is an opportunity for somebody else to come in and disrupt. It means you're missing some vital insight into what is actually going on. So the question becomes, and I think this is a question that we talk to a lot of our customers about, is how do we actually activate data as a strategic asset? And I'd like to talk about some of the clear things that we see from customers. Now, let me be straight here. Every customer is different. Every customer comes with different challenges. But there are some key things that we see our customers doing that we think are really impactful in terms of getting on that data activation journey. So let me start with the idea of running some experiments. And this has been talked about a number of times today as well. Organizations who do data and analytics well have a real culture of driving experiments around data. So if I think back to the traditional approach to building analytics, we would spend 3 months building a business case for a very large-scale implementation. And then we would spend a period of time going through a procurement cycle and installing some equipment. And then at some point, potentially months hence or years hence, we would start to deliver value. What we want to do in the data space is we want to collapse that right back such that we're getting data in real time and we're running experiments. We have hypotheses about data. We have hypotheses about the way that we can optimize our supply chain. We have ideas that if we run some models, we might be able to optimize a flight plan, or we might be able to optimize the amount of food that gets on a plane. There's such opportunities with data to run experiments, but if it takes you months or potentially years to stand that up, you've missed the opportunity to do that. So smart organizations are really good at running experiments and enabling a culture that enables you to prove out value with data. The beauty of that is once you've run that experiment and you've had some success, and let me be clear, sometimes you have failures. Failures are important, but low-cost failure is the key in this space. You prove value to the organization, and that gives you the ability to get your organization on board. And I have to say, I see a little bit of what I would call data and analytics fatigue out there, where projects haven't quite delivered on what it was suspected they were, the capabilities were. So that ability to really quickly prove there's value in data, show the organization and get them on board. And then that represents the opportunity to actually start to build out your data strategy. Now, I'm a really strong believer in data strategy. I think every organization should have a really clear vision of the opportunity that data and analytics represents to their business, to optimize their business, to optimize customer experience, to create new products, new opportunities. But what's really, really important is having a data strategy with a tactical plan to get started. Too often you see a beautiful data strategy that ends up in someone's drawer. So you want a vision that the entire organization is bought into, but a tactical plan for getting started. So what are the high value use cases that I'm actually going to begin with? How do I start to build skills and capabilities? How do I experiment with tools in the cloud that we haven't used yet? How do I show there's value? We have a fabulous customer here in Australia who talks about the fact that if they had an idea, an experiment they wanted to run with data, it used to take them 3 months to stand up a sandpit. They now do that in 48 hours on the platform. And the beauty of that is they're not limited to the tools they want to use. The beauty of AWS is as well as an incredible breadth of native analytics, AI, and ML services, we have an extraordinary marketplace of third-party services. We have incredible support for open source. That means whatever problem you have, you start with the problem and then you think about the tools that you actually want to use to evolve that problem. I love talking to customers because we don't spend our time talking about the technology. We talk about the problems they're trying to solve. We look for really high impact problems that are going to really make a difference to their business. And then we think about the way we architect to solve that problem. And so that beauty of having those building blocks is just fantastic. One of the other challenges that we see, particularly in this space, is at the moment we see an incredible evolution of the technologies around this. So, technologies that we would architect for and design for today, particularly in the analytics space, in 2 or 3 years may not be used. And so we're really talking to customers about designing for the long term in terms of your data strategy and the analytics tools that you use. And what I mean by that is the data is the asset. Whatever you do, don't lock your data together with the analytics tool or the compute engine that you're actually using. Keep that separate. That ability to flex and adjust your approach is going to be really important. The thing you don't want to do is spend a period of time unpicking, those potential silos of data that you have inside your organization, but then choosing another thing that silos your data such that in 2 or 3 years when some new tech comes out, something comes out of the open source world that's an incredible machine, next generation machine learning model, you want to be able to get your data to those things really, really quickly. So we really ask customers to think about what's a long-term platform that's going to enable me to flex and adjust as new things become available. Building a foundation is really important. So when I think about data strategy, I think about 2 things, and we will touch on this with the panel. I see it's incredibly important to run those experiments. It's incredibly important to run really quick. We talk about doing 4 to 6 week POCs with our customers. Let's identify a use case. Let's show you there's value, real business value really quickly. And we'll show you that in a 4 to 6 week sort of POC. And we want to keep iterating at that speed. We don't want to take months. At the same time you do that, you're proving value to the business, but there are some foundational things that you want to build, and I always talk about running those in parallel. So let's drop business value, but let's ensure that we're getting the foundations right. So let's ensure that we're ingesting data, that we're cataloging data, that we have data that's of high quality, that we have the right tools that enable different sorts of business users to get to that data and solve the right problem for their organization. So thinking about both of those things. So the one thing I would ask everyone in the audience to take from today is you don't suddenly turn on, you don't suddenly become a data-driven organization overnight. It actually requires that you start to build a muscle. So start with those experiments. Start with things that are high value for data inside your organization that you can't do today. Please come and talk to us. Talk to our partners about how do we quickly show you, the capabilities of the platform and show you that there is value in that. Start building that muscle, and that muscle is about running experiments. It's about using the tools and capabilities of the platform, but it's also about thinking about what your strategy is going to build like. It's about building a culture of experimentation, which I think is so radically important inside organizations, particularly around data, because it is the heartbeat of your organization. Now, we're going to jump into 3 areas with our panel today. We are going to start with talking about how you define a data strategy and what success looks like. So again, it's wonderful to have a vision for what data means for your organization, but actually as you start out on the journey, what are the key areas that you're going to measure in terms of success? We'll talk about getting the balance right, and with this idea of, yes, we want to drop business value, we want really quick feedback to the business, and we want to keep the business aligned and on the journey, but we need to be building a foundation. So how do we get that balance right between building out the platform and getting the data in versus focusing on those high-value business cases? I just want to make one comment here on this concept of getting the business on board. It's incredibly important as people who sit within IT and sit within data and analytics that you are really well aligned to your business strategy. And I heard a fabulous story just in the last few days from inside Amazon. So every business unit inside Amazon has, as part of their plan, they have a line that says, what are our investments in AI and ML? So right from the top down, every part of the organization has to have a plan for what they're doing with AI, ML, and the results, the expected results of those. And there is no excuse for not having a plan for any business unit. Now, that's one way you get a business on board. It's not right for everybody, but it is definitely a directive that's pushing, a direction down, and it's encouraging people who may not have had any experience with those tools into getting started. And the final thing that we're going to talk about around the panel is really what's the right team structure and how do we build that culture? And when I think about team structure, I think about 2 things. I think about the team structure actually to build analytics platforms and the skills you need to do data engineering, to do data science. But I think there's a broader context in data analytics, and that is how do you enable your organization to be more data literate? As we move forward, as data becomes more and more imperative to the success of your business, you need to have executives who understand data. You need to have frontline staff who understand data. You need people who are questioning and asking for data to support the decisions that they're actually making. And so with that, I would like to call to the stage Sarah Bassett. Sarah heads up Western Australia and South Australia for AWS, and she is going to run the panel with us. So thank you, Sarah.
And I'd like to invite up Glenda and Bobby to join the panel. So as Vicky mentioned, I get the pleasure, along with my team, in looking after customers in Western Australia and South Australia. And we're having conversations with our customers daily and loving to see how they're solving complex and compelling problems for their business, leveraging the cloud. But hands down, data strategy, data analytics, becoming data-driven is the hottest topic of those conversations. And so I'm thrilled to hear directly from our customers and be able to connect our customers with other customers so we can unpack some of these questions that Vicky's laid out for us. So thank you again for joining me up here. I think it's great. Just as a bit of context before we jump into those questions, I wanted to ask you each, if you wouldn't mind sharing your role, a little bit about the data strategy that you and your company have embarked on and kind of where you are in the journey, just as a little bit of context setting. So if it's okay, we'll start with you, Glenda.
Sure. So I'm Glenda Crisp at NAB. I think you can tell I'm not Australian. I moved here from Canada last year. I'd been a CDO at a financial institution in Toronto. So we have been on this journey now since I got here about a year ago. We revamped the whole data strategy when I landed, and really took a lens around the customer and putting the customer in the middle of it, and what was the value that we would bring to the customer and better experiences. And so we've been on that journey. I basically laid out 8 different capabilities. I didn't write the strategy all by myself. I wrote it with a bunch of different NAB people, and then we put it through a formal challenge process internally with senior executives to make sure we weren't missing anything. And so we're about a year in. I do personally believe in refreshing the data strategy on an annual basis, so we're about to kick off the refresh. It won't be as big of a rewrite this year as it was last year, but I think it's important to reflect what are the changes that have happened in the market, as well as what's the progress that we've made since we started last year.
Great. Thanks, Glenda.
Well,
Bobby?
thank you. This is Bobby. I am head of BI, data and analytics at Vodafone. I've been with Vodafone for the last 5 years. We've been on changing how we work in terms of how we utilize data across the organization. It's been about a couple of years, close to 2.5-year journey for us. The basic changes we've been making is, start with the business problem, understanding what are we trying to achieve first, and then look at the technology that supports it. Historically, strategy around data is developed within the tech organization, and that suits business problems, and we had lead times and stuff like that. But the basic change we made in the recent terms is, can we have a strategy closely aligned with the long-term objectives that company is trying to achieve? Can we have these big, beefy use cases written down first, and then look for technologies that support the use cases, rather than going back to the other way? I think that has proven very successful in the organization, and it has become a norm that we don't do any projects. We do proof of concepts first before we latch onto a bigger strategy. Along the way, we obviously make some dollars out of it, so it's good.
Great.
So, yeah.
Great, thanks for that. So it's great to hear, I'll just pick up on the fact, Glenda, that you mentioned that you really oriented around the customer and trying to identify use cases to make the customer's experience better. And you spoke directly around a business problem, a big, beefy business problem that you want to unpack and solve around analytics and choose the technology secondary. So that's great. Can you share a little bit about how you are then kind of measuring the success of this data strategy? Glenn, it sounds like you iterate on it on a regular basis, so that's great. So what sort of data points or KPIs or business outcomes are you leveraging to really test that it's going well?
Yeah, so for us, each of the capabilities, I make sure that we've got metrics in place to measure both progress as well as value. So I think you have to measure the progress that you're making against the strategy, and are you achieving the outcomes you set out to get, but also the value to the business. So, you also need to balance leading and lagging indicators. So for an example, around the lake that we're building, the lagging indicator, the value metric, is the speed at which we can provide data to analytics teams. And we benchmarked it against our legacy environment, and then we set targets for the next 3 years. And we have a plan as to how we're going to land our data. The leading indicator on this one is the number of sources that we've landed in the lake. So if I don't get the sources landed, then I know I'm not going to achieve that value metric that my business partners need. So that's just kind of an example. But we also have metrics around, cost savings and how are we doing to improve the efficiency of the organization, looking at metrics around data quality. I've been working with the team to try to benchmark and baseline the number of customer complaints related to data issues, because that's something I want to track super closely, because I believe the right number is 0. There should be no complaints about data. And so we're just baselining that right now so that then we can start to drive improvements.
And if I could just ask you a further question on that. So did that take quite a cultural shift within NAB when you embarked on that strategy, and that you were really trying to set and align your KPIs with business outcomes and get more stakeholders enrolled in that vision?
You know, it's kind of hard for me to say because I'm new at NAB, so I don't really know what the culture shift might have been. I have had people tell me that the fact that I actually put it out for challenge and debate was a new thing, and that I factored in their feedback was a new thing. But I think especially the finance team and the risk team really liked that I had metrics, and certainly the board was very happy to see that we had specific metrics and targets that we wanted to achieve. So I don't know if I'm quite answering your question. It's hard for me to judge because I'm still fairly new.
No, that's great, thank you.
So my version would be, how do we define success? Do we have KPIs? Yes and no. We do have KPIs in the old ways of working. We have KPIs around how the platforms are working, what are the SLAs, are we hitting daily sales numbers loaded into a certain sort and shape and stuff like that. Those are all there, perfect, which is fine. But with the last couple of years, the way we have transformed the team ourselves, those KPIs do not relate so much with what we are doing. And we are coming up with newer KPIs ourselves. We are defining the KPIs as we go, basically.
Okay.
The basic transformation, the basic thing that we are going through right now is, can we make sure more and more people in the organization use data? It is data in every decision making that we are trying to do. All the systems have access to data, have access to analytics, have access to insights. Is my team helping every part of the organization in their business use cases? So those are numbers that we can measure.
Sure.
There are initiatives that are, there are ongoing analytics or operational analytics for that matter that can produce dollar figures ongoing. But keeping customer at the heart, as Glenda says, if we think of customer as a business problem to understand, because customers are very hard to understand, do we have initiatives across understanding about customer around what is the external data or external factors that are contributing to retaining the customer, or how do we improve the customer experience? The firm belief of our company is we are obsessed, like Amazon, about the customer. If we obsess about customer and customer experience, obviously the dollar value will just flow on.
Right.
That's how we are doing right now.
That's great. It's interesting when you mentioned that you're trying to get the rest of the organization to be consumers of data. So there's a bit of a push and a pull, it sounds like, and driving a new way to work.
Yeah, because firstly, the first step is to make data available to the users, to the business users, so they can use it. The second step is making sure there are experts from our team to help these business users to understand what is this data means. So very basic, but we are going back to roots, laying down bricks so we can leverage these KPIs at some point. Yeah.
That's great. It's a great segue to the next question, which is really about striking that balance between building those foundations, setting up the right data lake foundation or ingestion streams, et cetera, data sources, but also striking the balance with value-add outcomes back to the business. So do you guys have some comments on how you're managing that balancing act?
So in our case, I asked, so it's a huge secret, I asked for help. So when we were prioritizing which data to land in the lake, because we have a lot of data to land, my team took the first stab at it, and because we have all the data warehouses in the bank, we did a lot of analysis on which sources are most often used. So we created a list with tranches, and then I have an analytics committee that's got representatives from across the bank, and I put it in front of them. And I said, okay, here's the straw model, tell me what's wrong, and tell me where I should reprioritize. And so that resulted in us rejigging the list as to what landed first, second, third. And we've kept it relatively fluid, so we lock it down a quarter at a time. And I still have, my next set of, 3 quarters out of what I want to land. But constantly, every time somebody says, hey, I think this data is really important and I've got a use case for it, I've got some really great analytics thing I need to do, or I have a regulatory requirement I need to address, then we'll just reprioritize. And so as long as you can make a case and give me an argument as to, you know, the value that it's going to generate for the bank, then I'm happy to move the data source up the list. And that's really worked quite well for us.
Yeah, good.
In my case, I mean, we didn't talk about data lake or ingestion techniques at all. We had a long-range plan or the company objectives, and aligning to those goals, I have defined these are the industry best practices or the use cases that Vodafone needs in terms of analyzing data, ML and AI best practices and whatnot. We presented that across the whole organization to the heads of GM level communities. We have basically found out that, you know, let's land on a business case which is very minimal in effort and has a beefy customer experience problem to solve. And also, let's look at the timeframes. So we have latched upon a 12-week window program, or first project to deal with. We partnered up with Amazon and the Intellify, the Amazon partner, who's won the award yesterday. Went on a journey of a project, and we are very successful in that.
Right.
So it is just about that first use case.
Right.
Once you have the exec backing, the right level of engagement across the business units, I think it's bound to be a success.
Right, that's great. So taking Vicky's advice and just getting started, asking questions, experimenting, continuing on. Could either of you share one of the workloads or the outcomes you delivered back to the business that you felt like was really enabled by this data strategy and the approach you've taken?
We've got some new tools going in, but I would say on the advanced analytics team have been able to do some really interesting work around machine learning because we started building our advanced analytics platform at the same time as the lake. So we've been able to do some interesting things around fraud, and don't like to talk about those too much, but we definitely spent a lot of time trying to improve in that space.
Great.
And then, of course, there's the QuickBiz model that has been profiled here last year, which is, again, on that platform. But that's been a way for us to talk to the business and say, where's the burning platform, whether it's on the credit side or on the fraud side or the anti-money laundering side, and push into all of those opportunities.
Right.
And frankly, the ability to spin up capabilities in the cloud has just made it much faster.
That much easier. That's great.
So my example would be that we were trying to look at from perspective that, you know, if we have non-integrated data sources, can we look at a platform problem also, and at the same time a business problem to answer. So from a platform point of view, non-integrated data sources will be integrated as part of the project. And also we are looking at one touch point from a customer side, let's say digital for that matter. Can we do something in the journey that can significantly improve the customer experience and significantly reduce our costs? So I think it is a three-dimensional view of the project that we took, and I think we landed on a good use case, and it's been pretty successful.
That's great, because we often see that those are the catalysts for just opening Pandora's box and more requests and getting the organization to start leveraging data more. So thanks for sharing that. We'll go to the last thread, which is really around skills and competency and building an organization to deliver against this data strategy. So I just want to ask an open question about how you're thinking about building out your organization, and that may be a different organizational model that you're thinking about, but also just hiring the right talent.
So I guess just generally we take a hub and spoke approach. So at the center we have the hub, and then each of the business areas within the bank would have a spoke, whether that be analytics or data stewardship. And so we've built out training for data stewards that gets rolled out. That's all online. We've been working very closely with AWS on the NAB Cloud Guild, and we've made huge progress in really upskilling. I mean, over 4,000 people have been trained in the last year on AWS. And then on the analytics side, we've had learning pathways in place for quite a while. And we're continuing to find other content to put out for all of the analytics teams across the whole bank. Because that's like, it's not just about lifting the talent in my team. I'm actually far more concerned about lifting the talent across the bank so that we have the right capability to use the data. Like I want the right consumer on the platforms that are really taking advantage of the tools. So we're continuing to invest in that as well.
That's great.
I think from my perspective, there are two angles to it. Basically, the skills are always there. They're a different skill, like data skill is always there. There are tools that are evolving that are new. So internal IP is pretty key for us because it's a complex business. So people who understand the business, who understand your warehouses, your traditional SQL experts can add a lot of value. It's about having a strategy to train them into these newer platforms and newer technologies.
Sure.
And also conscious that this is a conversation around how to start and where to start. Partners can help immensely to land onto a business case and run with their true business value. Amazon has helped us identify that partner. Intellify has been great. They come with the industrial expertise. That has given immense benefit for us because we can hit the ground running. At the same time, you need to have experts in these technologies also hired internally,
Sure.
sitting onshore, just across the, people across the business know these guys, and also they're mentoring your traditional experts in these newer ways of working, newer technologies as well.
Right.
So I think we've been balancing in those areas, partners to start and prove business value, and also have these strategies to upskill and have newer hires as well.
Yeah, it sounds like the way you put it is really great multi-pronged approach, right? And you're going to have these short-term needs, but this longer-term view on upskilling the business and being able to take on new technology as it's thrown your way. And it's something we see in the West as well, a lot of heavy resources companies there that really need that ingrained knowledge of the operations alongside the analytics, right? So I like that you said that's a competitive advantage for your business, is to make sure those people are involved as well as training the consumers of the data. So thanks for that. I guess just the final question for the panel is, as you mentioned, Bobby, this is about kind of getting started. For many people in the room might be already well on their way, or maybe just getting started. What's the best piece of advice for those kind of embarking on a data strategy?
Well, I would suggest two things. One is time box it. Don't spend a year creating a data strategy. Really, sit down, make it compelling, make it concise, but then get going and make sure you have a plan. And I think it's also important, from my point of view, that you have metrics that are measuring not only progress, but value. And I think that really helps to gain credibility as you start to execute.
That's great.
Cool. From my perspective, the one piece of advice that I would give is, if you don't have a strong exec backup to lead these kind of projects, and if you don't have a culture that allows you to experiment, do not start any project. It's very, very important because the CFO at that time has taken on this challenge and has pushed it forward for us, and that's how we succeeded.
Right.
Otherwise, with the organizational friction and the resistance, it is a killer for innovation. So you can't do many projects in that space. Yeah.
Oh, that's great advice. Good. Well, thank you again so much for joining us up here to speak to the audience. And if everyone could join me in thanking Glenda and Bobby, that'd be great. Thank you. Thanks.
Fantastic. Look, thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you again to both Glenda and Bobby. I really appreciate that we have a couple of different perspectives, and I think people who are at different stages of the journey, I take a lot from that. I think it's really, really important to get started. It's really important to actually build out that muscle, and that really does mean starting with some experiments. And as an organization, AWS is really happy to work with our customers to help define some really high impact, high value use cases that you'd actually just like to experiment with. That's the best part of my job, is talking to our customers about the business challenges. But once you get going, then thinking about how you evolve and industrialize, because the ideal outcome for us is we want customers with data on the platform who are getting so much value out of the services, who have an organization who are really, really data-driven, that every day they come in and they want to use that data to test their hypotheses, to improve customer experience, to optimize supply chains, to make their business better and more effective. So once again, thank you. We really appreciate when people take the time to share their insight. And thank you for your time and attention.